Hi guys and welcome to KeebWorks. Today I'll be taking a look at the second generation Razer BlackWidow as well as the Razer Green switches. Let's get started. Now I mentioned second generation. This is because in 2014, when this keyboard was made, Razer launched the Razer Green and the Razer Orange switches as the world's first keyboard mechanical switch designed for gaming. And as you can see from this screenshot, they were so proud of this, they repeated the exact same title as the subheading just below it. Thank you, Razer. I should also mention that I'll be referring to the first generation BlackWidow as the 2010 model from now on. Now, as for the switches, the model I have has the Razer Greens. Although both the green and the orange switch are manufactured by KeebWorks and later by Greetech. And even later than that, Razer added dual side walls to the switches mainly for dust and water resisting purposes. But the biggest reason as to why they made the switch from cherry switches is because they specifically wanted to make a switch for gaming. After all, Razer is a company focused on creating gaming peripherals, and the switch kind of delivers, but kind of doesn't at the same time. You'll see what I mean later on. Now, let's move on to the keyboard categories. Starting with build quality, it's almost exactly the same as the 2010 model, apart from a couple of things. It now features a matte black plastic surface instead of the glossy black plastic that we saw in the 2010 model. That's a good improvement in my opinion. Another improvement is the much thicker braided cable on the base model, which is a nice touch. It also now has a USB, a mic in, and a headphone out port on the right side, which previously you could only get in the ultimate version. So that's the good things. Now let me talk about the bad ones. Starting with the keycaps, they are still cheap pad printed keycaps with even worse legends than before. Yes guys, they made the ugliest legends even uglier. Here's what I mean. Take a look at the ampersand key on the 2010 model. It's not bad, right? It looks pretty good actually. Now on the 2014 model, this is what it looks like. Yeah, big difference. I'll just note that this also applies for every single one of the secondary legends. Just raise the things, I suppose. Another bad feature is the switch and keycap wobble. Take a look at this. Now, I only showed you 5 keys there, but all the keys wobble to an extreme amount. This usually isn't even an issue, but on this board it is, and I don't know why. The next thing I don't like is the non-standard bottom row. I've complained about this in the past, and I still don't like it when manufacturers do it, because it's quite pointless in my opinion. And lastly, the screws are still underneath the rubber pads on this keyboard. It's such a terrible design choice, and they could have easily moved the pads elsewhere, but I guess they had to save costs somewhere. With that said, it's almost built the exact same way as the 2010 model, so it gets an 8 out of 10. Now with features, it's basically exactly the same as the 2010 model. You still get the 5 macro keys, the media controls, the gaming lock, and the sleep function. Although some of them are now in different places. And the problem with the macro key recording still persists. Yes, you still have to download the Razer Synapse software, and yes, it still sucks. So no, you still cannot use the macro keys on the fly as advertised on the box. Thanks, Razer. They also left out the weird features from the 2010 model, One of them is the fact that the F keys are still shifted to the right. I don't know why they kept this, but I suppose it's for saving costs. Another thing they didn't change are the stabilizers. They still use Costa-like stabs, which I personally don't like. And I have to make an apology here. In my previous video, I mentioned that Costa stabs like these were cheaper alternatives to cherry stabs. But that's not true. It's just another type of stabilizer, so I apologize. Someone on GeekHack pointed that one out to me, so thanks mate. Now, for the biggest feature of this board, the switches, aptly named the Razer Green switches. This is a 2014 model, making it the very first boards to get the switches. And I should mention that they also developed the Razer Orange switch alongside. That switch is a tactile switch, and it's a replacement to the Cherry MX Brown. As to why they picked those colors, no one really knows. The score for the features is an 8 out of 10, which is really good even for today's standard actually. Daily performance is where this keyboard trumps the 2010 model. The first major improvement is the fact that the switches don't chatter or ghost anymore. Nice. But at the same time, that should not have been an issue anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's still an improvement no matter how you look at it. In terms of the macros, you pretty much know the story now. Yes, you still can't use them, they still suck. You still can't use them on the fly. They're basically pointless. In terms of the switches, however, there are improvements, as you can see from the information listed here on the back of the box. What do these mean? Well, you'll find out in the switch category. Long story short though, it's not that different from Cherry MX Blue. With that said, it gets a 6 out of 10 for daily performance. Reliability is a big improvement, since it doesn't have any major issues as of making this video anyway. All I can say is that it's been a reliable keyboard so far. But remember, this is still made by Razer and they aren't exactly known to make reliable products. So you might have an issue or two in the future. I've also seen these listed on eBay as parts or not working, so bear that in mind. However, it gets a 5 out of 10, 3 points higher than the 2010 model. In terms of value, if you're looking to buy one of these used, you can pick one up for between 25 to 30 pounds, which is not too bad. This competes with brand new Chinese clone boards that use Outemu or Kale switches. I'd give it a 5 out of 10 for its current value, but if you find it cheaper, then even better. Now, moving on to the switch categories. Starting with smoothness, it's just as scratchy as the Cherry MX Blue in basically every regard. It's not smooth in my standards, so it gets a 4 out of 10. Quite disappointed really. Weighting is also almost the same, which I didn't find too bad on the MX Blue. It's not bad on this switch either. Here's the force curve between the two switches so you can compare them side by side. So for weighting, they get a 5 out of 10. For sound, they are very similar as they use the exact same click jacket design as the MX Blue switch. However, these switches sound a little higher pitch, which I already didn't like with the MX Blue, and I don't like them here either. But I have to mention that there are people who do like this switch and do like the click jacket design. I'd be happy to give them a 6 out of 10. Now, for the typing demo. Enjoy. Now, for typing performance, these switches were optimized for gaming, and that means no attention was really put towards the typing experience. But it's not a bad switch for typing. I enjoyed typing on these switches just as much as I did on the MX Blue. So despite it being made specifically to game, it can be a decent switch to type on too. Remember, this was designed for people already using the MX Blue but want to transition to an improved version of it, and Razer just happened to be offering that here. I'll give them a 6 out of 10. Gaming performance is where the Switch is supposed to excel at. So earlier I showed you this image. Now I'll explain what these terms mean, since it's one of Razer's important marketing materials. One thing to note before I start is I am not a hardcore gamer of any kind. I don't compete in games, I'm not an esports player, I'm not anything like that. Just a note. With that out of the way, let's start with the actuation point. The Razer Green Switch is said to have a 1.9mm actuation point compared to the 2.2mm of a traditional Switch. Although I didn't notice the difference. Funny thing is, in the force curve it shows it actuates at 2.1mm, which I believe a little more. Secondly, the actuation versus reset point is reduced from 0.7 to 0.4mm. Again, I didn't notice this. Thirdly, the lifespan of these switches is rated at 60 million opposed to 50 million. Of course, I'm not going to be able to test that, so I'll just leave this one. Lastly, the actuation force is the same, but Razer claims that their Switch has an optimized tactile feel. It's obviously a gimmick because they feel very similar to the Cherry MX Blues. They did leave out one more aspect, which is the reduced switch travel. As you can see from this force graph comparison, the Razer Switch has a switch travel of 3.8mm as opposed to 4mm. And if you've been with the common theme, I didn't really notice the difference. Actually, at first I did, but it didn't feel any shorter after a couple of hours. However, I'll be nice and give it a 5 out of 10. I think with the improvements, albeit very tiny ones, it deserves it. So in conclusion, it's a slightly better keyboard than the 2010 model, although the differences in the Switch performance are very small and you shouldn't base your purchasing decisions based on that alone. But it is more reliable and it's not as annoying to use as the 2010 model. And that's what makes this keyboard the better choice, for the right price anyway. The final score for the keyboard is 32 out of 50 or 64%, placing it between the GK61 and the 2010 BlackWidow. The final score for the Switch is 26 out of 50, just barely beating the MX Blue. Next week, I'll be reviewing my all-time favorite old school gaming keyboard. Until then, take care and goodbye.